The fluorescent lights of the federal building cast harsh shadows as Maria Vasquez pushed her maintenance cart down the marble corridor at 2:47 a.m. Her worn sneakers squeaked softly against the polished floor, the only sound in a building that housed secrets during the day and ghosts at night. For 3 years, she had been invisible here, just another face in a blue uniform, emptying wastebaskets and mopping floors, while the important people slept safely in their beds, never knowing that the woman cleaning up after them had once been the most feared operative in naval special warfare. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maria moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to make every motion count. At 45, she still carried herself with an understated grace that most people attributed to good posture rather than years of combat training. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her brown eyes held a depth that spoke of experiences far beyond the custodial closets and supply rooms, where she now spent her nights. A small scar above her left eyebrow, nearly invisible, unless you knew to look for it, was the only visible reminder of a life that officially never existed. The night shift suited her perfectly. While the rest of Portland slept, Maria could work in solitude, maintaining the careful routine that had kept her hidden for over a decade. She knew every corner of the building, every security camera angle, every guard's patrol schedule. Not because she was planning anything, but because some habits died harder than the person you used to be. The federal building was home to multiple agencies, from immigration services to the D, and Maria had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated which departments were working late cases and which floors were truly empty. Tonight felt different somehow. There was a tension in the air that reminded her of pre-mission briefings, when the silence carried weight and everyone was thinking about things they couldn't discuss. Maria had developed an instinct for danger over the years, and something about this particular Tuesday night was setting off alarms in her head. She paused at the elevator bank, listening to the building's familiar sounds, but everything seemed normal. The hum of the ventilation system, the distant whir of copy machines on standby, the soft buzz of security monitors in empty offices. She pushed the button for the 7th floor, where the Naval Criminal Investigative Service maintained a small field office. It was always her last stop of the night, partly because it required special clearance and partly because she had developed a superstitious routine about saving it for last. The NCIS office held too many memories, too many reminders of the world she had left behind. Sometimes she would find recruitment posters on the walls or glimpse classified documents left carelessly on desks, and the familiar ache of loss would settle in her chest like an old wound reopening. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Maria stepped into the hallway that led to Suite 714. Her security badge, labeled Maria Vasquez, Custodial Services, granted her access to most areas of the building, though she was technically supposed to be escorted in certain sections. The night supervisor had long since stopped checking on her, trusting that the quiet woman who never caused problems and always finished her work on time could handle herself. If only he knew how capable she truly was. As she approached the NCIS office, Maria noticed something unusual. Light was spilling from under the door, and she could hear voices inside, low and urgent. Her training kicked in automatically, analyzing the situation without conscious thought. 3 distinct voices, all male, speaking in the clipped tones of military personnel discussing operational matters. One voice carried the authority of command, while the other 2 responded with the deference of subordinates receiving orders. Maria had heard thousands of similar conversations over the years, and the pattern was unmistakable. She knocked softly on the door, following protocol even though every instinct told her to retreat. The voices stopped immediately, followed by The sound of chairs scraping against the floor and papers being shuffled. After a moment, the door opened to reveal a man in his 50s wearing a rumpled suit and the tired expression of someone who had been working too long on too little sleep. "Evening," he said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. "You're the cleaning lady, right? We're going to be here a while longer. Can you come back tomorrow?" Maria nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "Of course, sir. I'll just empty the trash cans in the hallway and move on." She had perfected the art of being forgettable, speaking just enough to be polite, while projecting the kind of invisible competence that made people dismiss her as background scenery. But as she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of the office. Interior through the partially open door. Maps covered one wall, marked with red pins and connecting strings that formed patterns she recognized from operational planning. Computer screens displayed satellite imagery of what looked like coastal regions, and a table in the center of the room was covered with photographs that appeared to be surveillance shots. Two men in casual clothes stood near the maps, their bearing and haircuts marking them as military despite their civilian attire. One was younger, maybe early 30s, with the lean build of someone who stayed in peak physical condition. The other was older, stockier, with gray at his temples, and scars on his hands that spoke of active fieldwork rather than desk duty. Before the door closed completely, Maria heard a fragment of conversation that made her blood run cold. "Operation Neptune's daughter is compromised," the southern accented man was saying. "Someone leaked the insertion point, and now we've got a team pinned down in hostile waters with no viable extraction plan." Maria continued down the hallway, pushing her cart with steady precision while her mind raced. Operation Neptune's daughter had been her mission, her creation, her legacy from another life. She had developed the insertion protocols, trained the first teams, and led more successful water-based infiltrations than any operative in naval special warfare history. The operation had been classified at levels that required congressional oversight, and the fact that someone was discussing it in a field office meant either the security apparatus had completely broken down or something catastrophic was happening. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She finished her rounds mechanically, muscle memory guiding her through the familiar routine while her thoughts spiraled back to memories she had spent years trying to suppress. Maria Vasquez, the night janitor, had been born from the ashes of Lieutenant Commander Elena Santos, call sign Siren, the woman who had revolutionized underwater combat operations and led missions that prevented terrorist attacks from ever making the evening news. Elena Santos had died officially in a training accident 12 years ago. Her body never recovered from a night dive gone wrong off the coast of Virginia. The truth was more complicated. Elena had discovered that someone within naval intelligence was selling operational details to foreign buyers, putting American lives at risk for profit. When she tried to report her findings through proper channels, she learned that the corruption went deeper than she had imagined, reaching into the highest levels of military command. Rather than face assassination disguised as an accident, she had chosen to disappear, using her extensive knowledge of identity creation and operational security to become someone else entirely. For 12 years, Maria Vasquez had lived quietly in Portland, working night shifts and staying invisible while Elena Santos remained officially dead and buried in Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. It had been a necessary sacrifice, the only way to stay alive long enough to gather evidence against the people who had betrayed everything she had sworn to protect. But evidence was useless if you were dead, and staying alive meant staying hidden, even when it tore at her soul to watch from the sidelines while others fought the battle she had once led. Now hearing Neptune's daughter discussed in urgent whispers by people who shouldn't have known it existed, Maria felt the careful walls she had built around her past beginning to crumble. If the operation was compromised, it meant people were Going to die, probably people she had trained personally before her supposed death. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like armor she had forgotten she knew how to wear. Back in the custodial closet on the first floor, Maria sat on an overturned bucket and tried to think through her options. She could continue with her routine, finish her shift, and go home to her small apartment where no one would ever connect the quiet, cleaning lady with the legendary operative who had once been whispered about in the darkest corners of military intelligence. It would be the safe choice, the smart choice, the choice that would preserve the life she had built from nothing. But safety had never been her priority when lives were at stake. Elena Santos had earned her reputation by swimming through enemy harbors in the dead of night, attaching explosives to ships that were carrying weapons to terrorists, and extracting intelligence assets from situations that everyone else considered hopeless. She had been the ghost who moved through water like she was born for it, the operative that other Special Forces teams requested by name when the mission parameters exceeded normal capabilities. Maria pulled out the cheap cell phone she used for emergencies and stared at the screen for a long moment. There was a number programmed into the memory, one she had never used but had memorized years ago as an insurance policy. It belonged to Admiral Rebecca Mitchell, the only person in the military hierarchy who had believed Elena's warnings about corruption and who had helped arrange her disappearance when the alternatives became too dangerous. Mitchell would be retired now, probably living quietly somewhere with her own collection of secrets and regrets, but she would remember the promises they had made to each other. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered, crisp and alert despite the late hour. Mitchell. "Ma'am, this is Siren," Maria said quietly, using the call sign she hadn't spoken aloud in over a decade. "I need to report a priority situation involving Neptune's daughter." The silence that followed lasted exactly 4 seconds, long enough for Mitchell to process the implications and decide how to respond. When she spoke again, her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent 30 years making life-and-death decisions in the dark corners of national security. "Siren, I hoped I would never hear from you again. It meant you were safe." "I was safe, ma'am. But Neptune's daughter is compromised, and I have reason to believe there's a team in immediate danger. I need to know if the corruption we identified 12 years ago is still active." Mitchell's laugh was bitter and tired. "Active? It metastasized. We've lost 17 operatives in the past 5 years to intelligence leaks, and the investigations keep getting buried or redirected. I've been fighting a war with my hands tied, trying to protect assets without knowing who to trust." Maria felt something cold settle in her stomach. 17 operatives dead because she had chosen safety over action, because she had been content to hide in the shadows while the cancer she had identified spread through the system she had once served. Elena Santos would never have made that choice, but Elena Santos had died to keep Maria Vasquez alive, and now it seemed that sacrifice had been for nothing. "Ma'am, I need current intelligence on the Neptune's daughter situation. If there's a team in the water, I might be able to help." "Negative, Siren. You're dead, remember? Dead operatives don't conduct rescue missions. The moment you surface, you become a target again, and this time I won't be in a position to help you disappear." Maria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 2 identities pulling her in different directions. Maria Vasquez wanted to stay safe, to maintain the quiet life she had built, far from the violence and betrayal that had defined her previous existence. But Elena Santos was stirring in her chest like a sleeping predator waking up, and Elena had never been able to walk away from a mission when lives were at stake. "How many people are in the water, Admiral?" 6, SEAL Team 7, insertion. "Went bad 40 minutes ago. They're trapped in a harbor complex with no extraction route and hostile forces closing in." The insertion plan was based on Neptune's daughter protocols, but someone leaked the approach vector. "They're sitting ducks. 6 men, probably young and well-trained, probably with families who thought they were on a routine training exercise. 6 men who were about to die because someone had sold their positions to the highest bidder, just like the corruption she had tried to expose 12 years ago. Maria could walk away, finish her shift, and read about their deaths in tomorrow's newspaper, filed under training accident or equipment malfunction, with no mention of the real circumstances. Admiral, I need you to patch me into the tactical frequency. I'm going to try to guide them out. Siren, even if I wanted to authorize that, which I don't, you're not equipped for water operations. You're a civilian now, remember? You empty trash cans for a living. Maria looked around the custodial closet, taking inventory of her resources. Cleaning supplies, basic tools, a maintenance cart, and the knowledge that she had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of situation. Hidden in her apartment were equipment caches that she had established over the years, just in case the past came calling. Swimming gear that was better than military standard, communication devices that couldn't be traced, and weapons that officially didn't exist. Ma'am, with respect, I've been preparing for this possibility for 12 years. I can be equipped. And in the water within 2 hours. These men don't have 2 hours, but they might have enough time for me to reach them if we move fast. The silence stretched longer this time, and Maria could almost hear Mitchell weighing the risks against the potential benefits. Finally, the Admiral spoke with the resigned tone of someone who had run out of good options. I'm going to pretend this conversation never happened. If you're determined to do something stupid, you'll do it whether I authorize it or not. But understand that once you break cover, there's no going back. The people who wanted Elena Santos dead 12 years ago are still out there, and they have more resources now than they did then. I understand, ma'am. Can you get me the tactical frequency? I'll have it transmitted to this number in 10 minutes. Siren. Mitchell paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the weight of old regrets and impossible choices. Be careful out there. The world needs more people like you alive, not dead. The line went dead, leaving Maria sitting alone in a custodial closet with the echoes of a life she had tried to leave behind. She looked at her hands, soft now from years of cleaning supplies and safe work, and tried to remember what they had felt like when they were weapons. Elena Santos had been able to hold her breath for over 6 minutes, swim through freezing water without a wetsuit, and navigate by starlight alone. Maria Vasquez wasn't sure if those skills were still there, buried under years of careful normalcy, or if they had atrophied beyond recovery. There was only one way to find out. Maria left the federal building at exactly 6 a.m., clocking out with the same punctuality that had marked her 3 years of employment. To anyone watching, she appeared to be exactly what she claimed to be, a middle-aged cleaning lady heading home after another quiet night of emptying trash cans and mopping floors. But beneath the surface, Elena Santos was awakening like a dormant program responding to activation codes, muscle memory and tactical instincts reasserting themselves with every step. Her apartment was a modest one-bedroom unit in a complex that catered to working-class residents who minded their own business and asked few questions. Maria had chosen it specifically for its anonymity and its proximity to the Columbia River, where she could practice swimming in the early morning hours without attracting attention. What her neighbors didn't know was that the unassuming janitor, who lived in 2C, had been conducting covert training exercises for years, maintaining skills that could mean the difference between life and death when the past finally caught up with her. The apartment itself was carefully designed to appear ordinary while concealing extraordinary capabilities. The furniture was generic and inexpensive, the kind that wouldn't draw notice during a casual inspection. But the bedroom closet contained a hidden panel that opened to reveal equipment worth more than most people's annual salaries. Military-grade communication devices, night vision equipment, and weapons that had been acquired through channels that no longer existed, all maintained in perfect condition and ready for immediate deployment. Maria changed out of her custodial uniform and into black cargo pants and a fitted tank top, clothing that looked civilian but was actually designed for water operations. The fabric was specially treated to reduce drag and maintain flexibility when wet, and the seams were reinforced to withstand the stress of combat swimming. As she dressed, she felt her body remembering postures and movements that it hadn't used in years, shoulders squaring and spine straightening into the bearing of someone who had commanded respect in the most dangerous situations imaginable. From the hidden cache, she retrieved a waterproof communication unit that looked like an ordinary smartphone but contained encryption capabilities that would have impressed NSA technicians. The device buzzed softly as it received the tactical frequency information that Admiral Mitchell had promised, along with a brief intelligence summary that made Maria's blood run cold. SEAL Team 7 had been inserted via submarine at 0200 hours for what was supposed to be a reconnaissance mission in the port of Long Beach. Their objective was to gather intelligence on suspected weapons smuggling operations that were believed to be connected to terrorist financing networks. The mission parameters had been based on Neptune's daughter protocols, using underwater approach routes that Elena Santos had pioneered during her years of active service. But someone had betrayed the operation. The SEALs had encountered heavy resistance almost immediately upon reaching their target, and their extraction submarine had been forced to withdraw when hostile vessels began actively hunting for it. Now 6 men were trapped in a harbor complex with no way out, surrounded by enemies who knew exactly where they were and exactly what they were trying to accomplish. Maria studied the satellite imagery that accompanied the intelligence brief, her trained eye automatically identifying potential insertion points and escape routes. The harbor was a maze of piers, warehouses, and industrial equipment that would provide cover for a skilled swimmer, but would also conceal enemy positions. The SEALs were pinned down in a warehouse complex near the eastern edge of the port, with hostile forces controlling all the obvious exit routes. But Maria saw something that the conventional tactical planners had missed. There was an old storm drain system that connected to the harbor through a series of underwater culverts, originally designed to channel rainwater runoff but abandoned years ago when the port infrastructure was modernized. The culverts were too small and dangerous for normal military operations, requiring someone with exceptional swimming skills and intimate knowledge of underwater navigation. Someone exactly like Elena Santos. She pulled up the communications array and began the complex process of establishing secure contact with the trapped SEAL team. The encryption protocols took several minutes to synchronize, but eventually she heard voices crackling through the static, tense and professional, despite their desperate situation. Request immediate extraction. We are taking effective fire from multiple positions. Bravo team. This is Overwatch, Maria transmitted, using a call sign that wouldn't identify her, but would establish her authority. I have your position, and I'm coordinating alternate extraction. Can you provide status on wounded? The response came back immediately, sharp with surprise and desperate hope. Overwatch, this is Bravo leader. We have 1 man down, non-critical, but needs medical attention. Who is this? Command told us extraction was impossible. Maria hesitated for a moment, knowing that her next words would irrevocably destroy the life she had built as Maria Vasquez and resurrect the ghost of Elena Santos. But looking at the tactical display showing 6 dots surrounded by hostile forces, the choice was already made. Bravo leader, my call sign is Siren. I developed the insertion protocols you used tonight, and I'm coming to get you out. I need you to hold your position for approximately 90 minutes while I reach your location. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds before Bravo leader's voice returned, thick with disbelief and something that might have been recognition. Siren? That's not possible. Siren died 12 years ago in a training accident. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, Maria replied, surprising herself with how easily the old confidence returned to her voice. Bravo leader, I need you. to move to the northeast corner of your building and establish overwatch on the storm drain entrance. I'll be coming up through the water, and I need to know that approach is clear. Roger, Siren, moving to overwatch position. Ma'am, the young SEAL's voice carried a note of awe that made Maria feel simultaneously proud and guilty. Ma'am, we thought you were a legend. The instructors told us stories, but we figured they were just trying to motivate us. The stories were probably exaggerated, Maria said, though she was already moving toward the equipment cache that would make those stories reality once again. But the skills were real, and they're about to save your lives. I'll contact you again when I'm in the water. She ended the transmission and began the final phase of preparation that would transform Maria Vasquez into Elena Santos for the first time in over a decade. The wetsuit was custom-made from materials that were technically still classified, providing thermal protection and flexibility that would allow her to swim for hours in conditions that would kill most people. The rebreather system was compact and efficient, designed for extended underwater operations without leaving the telltale bubble trail that would reveal her position to hostile observers. Most importantly, she retrieved the weapons cache that she had hoped never to need again. A modified HK-416 assault rifle with underwater firing capabilities, diving knife that could cut through steel cable, and explosives that were stable enough to carry underwater, but powerful enough to breach reinforced structures. The weight of the gear felt familiar and terrible, like putting on armor that she had sworn never to wear again. As she prepared to leave the apartment, Maria caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. The soft features and tired eyes of the night janitor had been replaced by the sharp focus and predatory calm of an elite operative preparing for combat. Elena Santos was fully awake now, and Maria Vasquez was fading into memory like a dream that ends when morning comes. The drive to the Columbia River took 45 minutes through early morning traffic, giving Maria time to review the mission parameters and prepare mentally for what lay ahead. She had conducted similar extractions dozens of times during her active service, but never after such a long period of inactivity, and never with so much personal investment in maintaining her cover identity. If anything went wrong, if she was captured or killed, the investigation would eventually lead back to Maria Vasquez and destroy the careful fiction that had protected her for so many years. But 6 men were counting on her, and Elena Santos had never failed an extraction mission. Not once, in over 100 operations conducted in the darkest corners of the world where American interests required protection that could never be acknowledged or celebrated. She had earned her legendary status by succeeding where others failed, by swimming through impossible conditions and extracting assets that everyone else had written off as casualties. The insertion point was a secluded boat ramp where Maria had practiced night swimming for years, maintaining her skills without attracting the attention of recreational boaters or Coast Guard patrols. She suited up in the pre-dawn darkness, checking and rechecking her equipment with the methodical precision that had kept her alive through missions where a single mistake meant death. The water was cold but not brutal, typical for late autumn. In the Pacific Northwest, Maria slipped into the river without making a splash, her body remembering the fluid motions that had once made her nearly invisible beneath the surface. The rebreather system cycled quietly as she began the long swim toward the ocean, following underwater landmarks that were invisible to everyone, except someone who had memorized every feature of the riverbed. For the first mile, she focused on rhythm and efficiency, letting her muscles remember the sustained effort required for long-distance underwater travel. Her stroke was smooth and powerful, cutting through the water with minimal resistance while the specialized fins propelled her forward at speeds that would have impressed Olympic swimmers. But this wasn't about speed or competition. It was about endurance and stealth, about reaching her destination without being detected by the sophisticated surveillance systems that protected American ports. As she approached the mouth of the Columbia River, Maria activated the navigation system that would guide her to Long Beach Harbor. The device used GPS and sonar to provide underwater positioning accurate to within 3 feet, essential for navigating the complex approach routes. That would take her to the trapped SEAL team. But technology was only part of the equation. The real navigation happened in her mind, where 12 years of experience and hundreds of similar missions provided an intuitive understanding of water conditions, current patterns, and the subtle environmental cues that meant the difference between success and discovery. The transition from river to ocean brought new challenges as Maria encountered the stronger currents and reduced visibility of coastal waters. The harbor approach required her to swim through shipping channels where massive cargo vessels created underwater turbulence that could disorient or injure an unprepared swimmer. But Elena Santos had trained in these exact conditions, and her body responded to the familiar environment like a perfectly calibrated instrument. 2 hours after entering the water, Maria reached the outer perimeter of Long Beach Harbor and began the most dangerous phase of her approach. Intelligence reports indicated that the hostile forces had deployed underwater sensors and patrol boats in an attempt to prevent exactly the kind of infiltration she was attempting. But the reports also showed that they were using conventional detection methods, scanning for the signatures of standard military diving equipment rather than the specialized gear that Elena Santos had helped develop years before her supposed death. She adjusted her approach angle to take advantage of the blind spots in their sensor network, using knowledge of detection systems that was technically still classified to thread between the electronic eyes that were searching for her. The storm drain entrance was exactly where the satellite imagery had indicated, concealed beneath a pier structure that provided perfect cover for her final approach to the trapped SEALs. Maria paused at the entrance to the culvert system, checking her equipment one final time before beginning the most dangerous part of the mission. The abandoned storm drains were narrow and twisted, filled with debris and structural damage that could trap or kill an unwary swimmer. But they were also completely outside the awareness of the hostile forces, who were focused on the obvious approach routes rather than the forgotten infrastructure that Elena Santos had made her specialty. She activated her communication system and transmitted on the SEAL team's frequency. "Bravo, leader, this is Siren. I'm beginning my approach through the storm drain system. Estimate 15 minutes to your position." The response was immediate and relieved. "Roger, Siren. We're ready for extraction." The advised hostile activity has increased in the past hour. They're bringing in additional forces and we're running low on ammunition. Understood, Bravo, leader. When I reach your position, we'll have a narrow window for extraction. I need your team ready to move immediately, and I need your wounded man prepared for underwater transport. Copy that, ma'am. Siren. The young SEAL's voice carried a note of curiosity that made Maria smile despite the circumstances. "Ma'am, the stories about you, were they true? The mission in Somalia, where you swam through a harbor full of enemy divers, or the extraction in the Philippines, where you held your breath for 8 minutes to avoid detection?" Maria navigated a particularly narrow section of the culvert system, her body remembering the claustrophobic feeling of swimming through spaces barely wide enough for a human being. The stories the SEAL was referring to were indeed true, though the classified nature of those operations meant that only legends and whispered rumors remained to inspire new generations of special operations personnel. The stories were classified. "For good reasons," she replied, emerging into a larger chamber that connected to the warehouse complex where the SEALs were trapped. "But yes, most of them were true. And in about 10 minutes, you're going to be part of a new story that will be just as classified and just as legendary." She could see light filtering down from above, indicating that she had reached the storm drain outlet that connected to the warehouse basement. According to her intelligence brief, the SEALs were positioned on the ground floor of the building, Surrounded by hostile forces who had no idea that their target was about to receive reinforcement from below, Maria surfaced in the flooded basement, her head barely breaking the surface of the dark water that had accumulated from years of neglect and recent rain. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant sound of gunfire from the floors above where the SEALs were fighting for their lives. She checked her weapons, ensuring that everything was ready for the transition from water to land operations, and began moving toward the stairs that would take her to the ground floor. Elena Santos was fully operational now, every sense heightened, and every movement calculated for maximum efficiency. The careful invisibility of Maria Vasquez had been replaced by the predatory focus of someone who had conducted similar rescues in hostile territory around the world. She was no longer emptying trash cans in a federal building. She was hunting the enemies of the men who had served their country with honor and were now depending on her for their lives. As she reached the basement stairs, Maria could hear voices above, tense communications between the trapped SEALs as they managed their ammunition and tried to maintain defensive positions against superior numbers. But there was something else in their voices now, something that hadn't been there an hour ago when they were facing certain death with no hope of rescue. They had hope now because Siren was coming. The legend was real, and she was about to remind the world why some stories become immortal. The basement stairs creaked under Maria's weight as she ascended toward the sounds of combat, each step bringing her closer to a world she had abandoned 12 years ago. The warehouse above echoed with the sharp crack of rifle fire and the deeper boom of explosive devices, punctuated by the controlled voices of professional soldiers managing a desperate situation. She paused at the basement door, listening to the tactical communications that painted a clear picture of 6 men fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. Through the thin walls, she could hear Bravo leader coordinating defensive positions, while his men reported ammunition counts that were dropping dangerously low. The wounded SEAL was still mobile but slowing the team down, and the hostile forces were systematically closing off escape routes with the methodical precision of experienced operators rather than random criminals. Someone was directing this assault with military expertise, which meant the corruption Elena Santos had tried to expose 12 years ago had grown into something far more sophisticated and deadly. Maria checked her weapon one final time, feeling the familiar weight of the modified HK-416 in her hands. The rifle had been customized for underwater operations, with specialized ammunition that remained effective even after prolonged submersion and a barrel coating that prevented corrosion from saltwater exposure. Every component had been selected and tested during her years of active service, when failure meant not just mission failure, but the death of the people depending on her expertise. She keyed her communication system, broadcasting on the SEAL team's tactical frequency while maintaining the encrypted protocols that would prevent hostile forces from intercepting her transmissions. The technology was generations ahead of standard military communications, incorporating quantum encryption, methods that were still theoretical when Elena Santos had supposedly died in that training accident. Bravo leader, this is Siren. I'm directly below your position and preparing to breach the ground floor. I need you to concentrate your defensive fire on the western approach while I eliminate the eastern positions. The response came back immediately, tight with controlled excitement and desperate hope. Siren, we're taking heavy fire from at least 12 positions. These aren't local criminals, ma'am. They're using military tactics and equipment that suggests professional training. Someone set us up with intelligence that was designed to get us killed. Maria felt a familiar cold rage settling in her chest, the same emotion that had driven her to investigate the corruption that had ultimately forced her to disappear. 12 years ago, she had uncovered evidence that classified operational details were being sold to hostile entities, resulting in American casualties that were explained away as training accidents or equipment failures. Now it appeared that the same network had grown bold enough to target entire SEAL teams in coordinated ambushes. Copy that, Bravo leader. Someone definitely set you up, and when we get out of here, we're going to find out who. But right now, I need you to trust me and follow my instructions exactly. When I breach the eastern wall, I need your team to move toward the northwest corner of the building. There's a service elevator shaft that will provide cover for our extraction route. She moved toward the eastern wall of the basement, where her reconnaissance had identified a structural weakness that could be exploited for rapid entry. Explosives she carried were designed for precisely this kind of underwater breach operation, with shaped charges that could punch through reinforced concrete while minimizing collateral damage. But using explosives would announce her presence to every hostile force in the area, eliminating the element of surprise that had been her greatest advantage. Instead, Maria chose a more subtle approach that relied on skills she had developed during years of covert infiltration missions. The eastern wall contained a service hatch that had been sealed years ago when the building's infrastructure was updated, but the metal covering was corroded enough to be removed quietly with the proper tools. She worked quickly and silently, using techniques that she had perfected in hostile territory, where discovery meant immediate death. The hatch opened onto a crawl space that ran beneath the ground floor, providing access to electrical and plumbing systems that serviced the entire warehouse complex. Maria squeezed through the narrow opening, her body remembering the flexibility and spatial awareness that had allowed her to navigate similar, confined spaces during infiltration missions in buildings that were supposed to be impregnable. Above her, the sounds of combat continued with increasing intensity as the hostile forces pressed their advantage against the outnumbered SEALs. She could hear boots moving across the floor directly overhead, accompanied by the sharp commands of someone coordinating the assault with professional efficiency. The voice was speaking English with no discernible accent, which confirmed her suspicion that this was not a random, criminal operation, but a planned elimination of American military personnel. Maria reached a junction in the crawl space that provided access to multiple areas of the building, including a maintenance shaft that would allow her to emerge behind the hostile forces' eastern positions. She checked her equipment one final time, ensuring that every weapon and communication device was ready for immediate use, then began the careful process of moving into position for an assault that would announce Elena Santos' return to the world of covert operations. The maintenance shaft was barely wide enough to accommodate her shoulders, but Maria moved through it with the fluid efficiency of someone who had trained extensively in confined space operations. Her breathing was controlled and silent, her movements calculated to avoid any sound that might alert the enemies positioned above. This was the kind of infiltration that had made Elena Santos legendary among special operations personnel. The ability to appear exactly where she was needed most at the precise moment when her intervention could change the outcome of an impossible situation. She reached the access panel that would allow her to emerge behind the hostile positions, pausing to listen to the tactical situation developing above. The enemy forces were closing in on the SEAL's position with coordinated precision, using suppressive fire and movement techniques that demonstrated extensive military training. But their focus was entirely on the obvious approaches, leaving them vulnerable to the kind of unexpected assault that Elena Santos had made her specialty. Maria keyed her communication system one final time before beginning the operation that would either save 6 American lives or result in her own death alongside theirs. Bravo leader, this is Siren. Commencing assault on eastern positions in 30 seconds. When you hear explosions, move immediately toward the northwest corner and prepare for extraction through the service elevator shaft. Roger, Siren. We're ready to move on your signal. Ma'am. The young SEAL's voice carried a note of reverence that made Maria's chest tighten with emotion. Ma'am, whatever happens, we want you to know it's been an honor to serve with a legend. Maria closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of 12 years of hiding and pretending to be someone she wasn't. Elena Santos had earned her reputation by never leaving anyone behind, by succeeding where others failed, and by protecting American lives even when the cost was her own official existence. Maria Vasquez had been a necessary fiction, but Elena Santos was who she truly was, and these 6 men deserved to see her at full capability. The honor is mine, gentlemen. Elena Santos doesn't leave people behind. She removed the access panel with surgical precision, emerging into the warehouse behind the hostile positions, like a ghost materializing from the shadows. The enemy forces were positioned exactly where her tactical analysis had predicted, focused on maintaining suppressive fire against the SEALs while coordinating a final assault that would overwhelm their defensive positions. They had no idea that death was approaching from behind them with the silent efficiency of someone who had conducted similar operations in hostile territory around the world. Maria's first target was the communications specialist who was coordinating the assault from a position near the eastern wall. She moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of silent elimination, her combat knife finding its target before the man could make a sound. The second target was a sniper positioned on an elevated platform overlooking the SEAL's defensive position, eliminated with the same silent efficiency that had made Elena Santos feared by enemies who never saw her coming. But stealth could only accomplish so much against 12 trained operators who were expecting resistance. As Maria engaged her third target, one of the remaining hostiles caught sight of movement in his peripheral vision and shouted a warning that transformed the tactical situation from silent infiltration to open combat. The warehouse erupted with muzzle flashes and the sharp crack of automatic weapons as both sides engaged in the kind of close-quarters battle that separated elite operators from conventional soldiers. Maria rolled behind a concrete support pillar as bullets sparked off the floor where she had been standing, her mind automatically calculating angles and distances while her hands moved with muscle memory to reload and reposition her weapon. This was the environment where Elena Santos had earned her reputation, the chaotic violence of urban combat, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. "Siren, we're moving to the northwest corner. Bravo, leaders." Voice crackled through her earpiece as the SEALs took advantage of the confusion to break from their defensive positions. "We've got your 6. The SEALs moved with the coordinated precision of a team that had trained together extensively, providing covering fire while advancing toward the extraction point that Elena had identified. But the hostile forces were adapting quickly to the changed tactical situation, repositioning to cut off the Americans' escape route while maintaining pressure that kept everyone pinned down behind inadequate cover. Maria emerged from behind the support pillar with her weapon firing in controlled bursts, each shot placed with the precision that came from years of combat experience in similar situations. She moved like liquid death through the warehouse, using cover and concealment to stay alive while systematically eliminating threats that stood between the SEALs and their extraction point. This was the Elena Santos that had become legendary, the operator who could single-handedly change the outcome of battles that seemed hopeless to everyone else. But the hostile forces were more numerous and better positioned than her initial assessment had indicated, and Maria found herself fighting a running battle while protecting 6 men who were depending on her expertise for their survival. Wounded SEAL was slowing the team down, and their ammunition was running dangerously low after hours of sustained combat. The extraction point was still 50 yards away, and the enemies were coordinating to cut off their approach with interlocking fields of fire. Maria made a decision that Elena Santos would have made without hesitation, the kind of calculated risk that separated true operators from people who merely carried the title. She activated one of the explosive charges she had brought for emergency, breaching operations not to destroy a wall or door, but to create a distraction that would allow the SEALs to reach safety. "Bravo team, take cover." She transmitted while simultaneously throwing the shaped charge toward the center of the hostile positions, moving to alternate extraction point. The explosion shattered windows throughout the warehouse and created a cloud of smoke and debris that temporarily blinded everyone in the immediate area. Maria used the confusion to sprint toward the service elevator shaft, laying down suppressive fire that kept the remaining enemies pinned down while the SEALs moved toward their only chance of escape. The elevator shaft was exactly where the building schematics had indicated, with maintenance ladders that would allow them to reach the basement level and connect with the storm drain system that had brought Elena to their rescue. But climbing down a vertical shaft while under fire required the kind of coordination and trust that could only exist between operators who understood that their lives depended on each other's competence. "Bravo, leader, you're first down the shaft," Maria commanded while maintaining a defensive position that protected the team's retreat. "Get your wounded man to the basement level and prepare him for underwater transport. I'll cover the withdrawal." The SEALs moved with disciplined efficiency, each man covering the next while they descended into the relative safety of the elevator shaft. But the hostile forces were recovering from the explosion and repositioning to cut off the Americans' escape route. Maria found herself fighting a delaying action against increasingly organized resistance, using the last of her ammunition to buy time for the men she had come to rescue. As the final SEAL disappeared into the elevator shaft, Maria grabbed a rope from her equipment pack and prepared to follow them into the basement. But enemy fire was intensifying around the shaft opening, and she realized that someone would have to hold the position long enough to ensure the team's escape. Elena Santos had never left anyone behind, but sometimes that meant staying behind to ensure others could live. "Siren, we're at the basement level." Bravo leader's voice carried up through the elevator shaft. "What's your status?" Maria looked around the warehouse, calculating the tactical situation with the cold precision that had kept her alive through hundreds of similar operations. The hostile forces were closing in from multiple directions, and her ammunition was nearly exhausted. She could follow the SEALs down the shaft and hope that her superior swimming skills would allow all 7 of them to escape through the storm drain system. Or she could hold the position long enough to ensure their escape while risking her own capture or death. But there was a third option, one that Elena Santos would have chosen without hesitation. She activated her final explosive charge, a larger device designed for structural demolition rather than tactical distraction. If she couldn't guarantee everyone's escape, she could at least ensure that the hostile forces would be too busy dealing with a collapsing building to pursue the SEALs through the storm drain system. "Bravo leader, I'm bringing down the building. To cover your extraction, get to the storm drain entrance and start swimming toward the river. I'll meet you at the extraction point." "Negative, Siren. We don't leave anyone behind." Maria smiled as she set the timer on the demolition charge, feeling a pride that she hadn't experienced since her days of active service. These were the kind of men that America produced at its best, soldiers who would risk their own lives, rather than abandon someone who had risked everything to save them. Elena Santos had trained dozens of operators with exactly that kind of courage and loyalty, and seeing it again after so many years of hiding reminded her why she had been willing to sacrifice her official existence to protect people like them. "You're not leaving me behind, gentlemen. I'm covering your withdrawal, and that's exactly where I'm supposed to be." Elena Santos doesn't run from fights, she finishes them. She placed the explosive charge against a load-bearing support column, then grabbed her rope and rappelled down the elevator shaft as enemy fire intensified around the opening above. The basement was flooded with several inches of water from the storm drain system, creating the aquatic environment where Elena Santos had always been most comfortable. The SEALs were already moving toward the drain entrance, with 2 men supporting their wounded teammate while the others provided security. "Siren, we're not leaving without you," Bravo leader insisted as she reached the basement level. We all go home together or nobody goes home. Maria checked her dive computer, calculating the time remaining before the demolition charge would bring down enough of the building to trap everyone in the basement. They had maybe 3 minutes to reach the storm drain system and begin swimming toward the river, assuming the explosion didn't compromise the structural integrity of the drainage tunnels themselves. It would be close, but Elena Santos had succeeded in situations with much tighter margins. Then we all go home together. She agreed, leading the team toward the storm drain entrance. Follow me, stay close, and remember that breathing underwater is optional for the next 20 minutes. The storm drain entrance was narrow and partially blocked with debris, requiring each man to squeeze through an opening that was barely wide. Enough for their equipment. Maria went first, using her superior underwater skills to clear obstacles and establish the safest route through the drainage system. The SEALs followed with the disciplined efficiency of men who trusted their lives to the expertise of someone who had earned legendary status through exactly this kind of impossible operation. As they entered the drainage tunnels, the demolition charge detonated with a thunderous roar that shook the entire harbor complex. Maria felt the concussion wave through the water, followed by the sounds of massive structural collapse as the warehouse came down on top of the hostile forces who had been trying to eliminate American military personnel. The tunnel system held, but debris and sediment clouded the water to the point where navigation became a matter of feel and instinct rather than vision. Maria led the team through the underwater maze with the confidence of someone who had memorized every twist and turn. During her reconnaissance, the wounded SEAL was struggling with the physical demands of underwater swimming, but his teammates supported him with the kind of loyalty that defined the special operations community. They moved as a unit through the dark water, trusting Elena Santos to guide them to safety, just as she had guided countless other operators through similar dangers over the years. The swim to the river took 45 minutes of sustained underwater travel through conditions that would have challenged Olympic athletes. Maria maintained a steady pace that pushed the limits of what the SEALs could manage while ensuring that no one was left behind. This was the expertise that had made Elena Santos legendary. The ability to operate in aquatic environments that were impossible for normal human beings while keeping everyone alive through knowledge and determination. That came from years of experience in the world's most dangerous waters. When they finally surfaced in the Columbia River, dawn was breaking over the Pacific Northwest, with the kind of spectacular sunrise that reminded people why they had chosen to serve something greater than themselves. Maria counted heads automatically, confirming that all 6 SEALs had survived the extraction before allowing herself to feel the satisfaction of another successful mission. Elena Santos was back, and she had reminded the world why some legends never truly die. The SEALs floated in the river current, their faces showing a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and something that looked like awe as they processed what had just happened. They had been extracted from certain death by someone who was supposed to be dead herself, rescued by a legend who had emerged from 12 years of hiding to save their lives. As they looked at the woman who had single-handedly changed the outcome of an impossible situation, understanding began to dawn in their expressions. "Ma'am," Bravo leader said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of reverence usually reserved for Medal of Honor recipients and fallen heroes. "Ma'am, you're really Elena Santos, aren't you? The siren of Ghost Squadron?" Maria looked at the 6 young men who represented everything that was best about American military service operators, who had risked their lives in defense of their country, and who deserved to know the truth about the woman who had saved them. Elena Santos had been officially dead for 12 years, but she was very much alive in the water of the Columbia River, surrounded by people who understood the meaning of sacrifice and service. Elena Santos died in a training accident 12 years ago, she said quietly. But Siren never stopped protecting the people who needed her most. The SEALs exchanged glances that spoke of a shared understanding that transcended rank and official protocols. They were looking at living history, at someone whose exploits had inspired their own commitment to excellence and service. Without anyone giving an order or making a suggestion, all 6 men moved into formation in the water and came to attention. With the precision of an honor guard at Arlington National Cemetery. Then, simultaneously and with perfect synchronization, they saluted the woman who had risked everything to save their lives. It was a gesture of respect that acknowledged not just her rescue of their team, but her years of service to the country that had officially erased her existence. The salute was held for exactly 10 seconds, long enough to convey the depth of their gratitude and recognition, short enough to maintain the operational security that would protect Elena's continued survival. Maria returned the salute with the crisp precision of someone who had earned the right to receive such recognition, feeling emotions that she had suppressed for 12 years, finally finding expression. This was why Elena Santos had been willing to sacrifice her official existence, to protect people like these who represented the best of American military service. The salute was worth more than any medal or commendation because it came from operators who understood the true cost of the work they all did in the shadows. "Gentlemen," she said as they broke the salute and began swimming toward the extraction point where Admiral Mitchell would be waiting with transportation and medical support. "It has been my honor to serve with you. But as far as anyone knows, you were extracted by an unidentified civilian who happened to be in the right place at the right time. Elena Santos remains dead, and that's how she stays alive to help the next team that needs her." The SEALs nodded with the understanding of professionals who knew that some operations existed outside the normal chain of command and official recognition. They had been saved by a ghost who needed to remain a ghost in order to continue protecting the people who served their country in the darkest corners of the world. The secret would be kept not because it was classified, but because it was the right thing to do for someone who had earned their eternal gratitude and respect. As they swam toward shore, Maria felt the weight of 2 identities settling into a new balance that she hadn't experienced in 12 years. She would return to being Maria Vasquez, the quiet janitor who emptied trash cans and stayed invisible in a world that had forgotten she existed. But Elena Santos was no longer buried beneath that fiction. She was integrated into it, ready to emerge whenever good people needed protection from the corruption and betrayal that threatened everything they had sworn to defend. The war was far from over, and the people who had set up the SEAL team were still out there, still selling American lives to the highest bidder. But now they faced an enemy they thought was dead, an opponent who had spent 12 years preparing for the moment when she would return to finish what she had started. Elena Santos was back, and the reckoning was coming for everyone who had betrayed the trust of the people they were supposed to protect. Admiral Mitchell was waiting at the extraction point with a medical team and transportation that would take the SEALs to a secure facility where they could be debriefed and treated without creating any official record of the night's events. As Maria climbed out of the river, she saw the older woman's expression of relief mixed with concern for what Elena's return to active operations might mean for her long-term survival. "Siren," Mitchell said quietly as the SEALs were loaded into waiting vehicles. "We need to talk about what happens next. The people who set up tonight's operation are going to know that someone with your capabilities interfered with their plans. Your cover may be compromised." Maria looked back toward the harbor where smoke was still rising from the collapsed warehouse, then at the Columbia River that had carried her to safety once again. Elena Santos had spent 12 years in hiding, but hiding was no longer an option when American lives were being sold to enemies who would use that information to kill more good people. "Then it's time to stop hiding and start hunting," she replied, with the cold determination that had made her legendary among the people who fought America's secret wars. Maria Vasquez was a necessary fiction, but Elena Santos has work to finish. The sun was fully up now, casting long shadows across the water that had been the scene of another successful extraction mission. In a few hours, Maria would return to her apartment and prepare for another night of emptying trash cans and mopping floors, maintaining the cover identity that had protected her for so long. But now she would be listening differently to the conversations in government buildings, watching for signs of the corruption that had forced her to disappear and that was still claiming American lives for profit. The legend of Siren was no longer buried in classified files and whispered stories. She was alive and operational, ready to protect the people who served their country with honor while hunting the enemies who had betrayed everything that service represented. The war for the soul of American Special Operations was about to begin. And this time Elena Santos would not be fighting alone. The safe house was a nondescript office building in downtown Seattle, the kind of place that housed insurance companies and accounting firms, where nobody asked questions about the people who came and went at unusual hours. Admiral Mitchell had chosen it specifically for its anonymity and its proximity to communication networks that could handle the kind of encrypted intelligence traffic that Elena's investigation would require. As Maria walked through the lobby at 3 a.m., she looked exactly like what she appeared to be, a cleaning woman arriving for her shift at a building where important people conducted business during normal hours. But the elevator took her to a floor that wasn't listed in the building directory, where Mitchell waited with intelligence analysts who had been pulled from retirement to work on cases that officially didn't exist. The room looked like a fusion of corporate conference space and military command center, with high-end furniture surrounding walls covered with maps, photographs, and data streams that painted a picture of corruption reaching into the highest levels of government and military command. "Siren," Mitchell said as Elena entered, using the call sign that had become her true identity again after 12 years of suppression. "Welcome back to the world of people who know too much for their own good." Elena studied the intelligence displays with the trained eye of someone who had spent years analyzing complex operational environments. The scope of the corruption was staggering, involving not just the sale of classified information, but the systematic elimination of military personnel who might expose the network. Names, dates, financial transactions, and communication intercepts created a web of betrayal that extended far beyond what she had discovered 12 years ago. "How many people are involved?" she asked, noting the organizational charts that showed connections between Pentagon officials, defense contractors, and foreign intelligence services. "At least 40 that we can identify," replied Dr. Sarah Shun, a former CI analyst who had been investigating defense contractor corruption before her official retirement. "But the network is compartmentalized, so most participants only know their immediate contacts. The people at the top have been very careful to insulate themselves from direct exposure." Elena moved to a wall display showing the financial flows that connected American military secrets to foreign bank accounts. The amounts were staggering, representing billions of dollars in payments for information that had resulted in American casualties around the world. But more disturbing was the systematic nature of the operation, suggesting that entire military units had been compromised for profit. "The SEAL team I extracted last night," she said, tracing connections between the failed mission and the broader conspiracy. "That wasn't random targeting. Someone specifically wanted those 6 men dead." Mitchell nodded grimly. "Bravo leaders. Real name is Lieutenant Commander David Park. 3 months ago, he stumbled across financial irregularities in his unit's operational funding that suggested someone was skimming money intended for equipment and support. He started asking questions, and suddenly his team started getting missions with unusually high casualty rates." Elena felt the familiar cold rage that had driven her to investigate military corruption 12 years ago, but now it was focused. By a decade of watching from the sidelines while good people died for other people's profit. Park and his team represented everything that was best about American military service, and they had been marked for death because they had the integrity to ask uncomfortable questions about financial irregularities. Who's running the network now? She asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer from the pattern she was seeing in the intelligence displays. Colonel Marcus Webb, Chen replied, pulling up a personnel file that made Elena's blood run cold. He's been promoted twice in the past 5 years, despite a service record that shows more failed operations than successful ones. But his failures always seem to benefit the same defense contractors, and his bank accounts show deposits that far exceed his military salary. Elena stared at the photograph of a man she had once served alongside, someone who had been trusted with classified information and the lives of American military personnel. Webb had been ambitious and ruthless even then, but she hadn't suspected that his ambition would lead him to betray everything they had sworn to protect. The realization that someone she had known personally was responsible for the deaths of dozens of operators made the corruption feel personal in a way that transcended professional obligation. Webb has been using his position in Pentagon intelligence to identify military personnel who might pose a threat to the network, Mitchell continued. Then he arranges for those people to be assigned to high-risk missions with compromised intelligence. The casualties look like operational failures rather than targeted assassinations. How many people has he killed? Elena asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Directly or indirectly, we estimate at least 60 American military personnel over the past 5 years, Chun replied. SEAL teams, Army Rangers, Air Force Special Operations, even some CIA operatives who got too close to the truth. All explained away as training accidents, equipment failures, or operational casualties in classified missions that can't be discussed publicly. Elena studied the victim list, recognizing names of operators she had trained or worked with during her years of active service. Each name represented someone who had served their country with honor and died because they had posed a threat to people who were selling American secrets for profit. The scope of the betrayal was so vast that it seemed impossible to comprehend, yet the evidence was undeniable. What about the foreign buyers? She asked, noting intelligence reports that showed connections to hostile intelligence services around the world. The primary customers are Chinese military intelligence, Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, and Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, Mitchell replied. But Webb isn't ideologically motivated. He'll sell to anyone who can afford his prices, including terrorist organizations and criminal cartels that use the information to target American personnel overseas. The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications of what they were discussing. This wasn't just corruption or even treason in the traditional sense. It was the systematic murder of American military personnel for profit, conducted by people who had sworn the same oaths and worn the same uniform as their victims. The betrayal cut so deep that it challenged fundamental assumptions about loyalty and service that had defined their careers. What's our operational authority for dealing with this? Elena asked, though she suspected the answer would be complicated by the classified nature of her own existence. Officially, we have no authority at all, Mitchell admitted. Elena Santos is dead, and Maria Vasquez is a civilian with no military or intelligence credentials. If we try to work through normal channels, the investigation will be buried or redirected by the same people we're trying to expose. Unofficially, Mitchell smiled with the cold satisfaction of someone who had spent 30 years navigating the darker corners of government service. Unofficially, there are people in very high places who are tired of watching American heroes die for other people's bank accounts. We have resources, we have intelligence, and we have operational flexibility that extends beyond normal legal constraints. Elena understood immediately what Mitchell was suggesting. This would be a black operation conducted outside normal command structures, with no official oversight and no public acknowledgement if it succeeded. The kind of mission that Elena Santos had specialized in during her years of active service, when American interests required protection that could never be officially acknowledged or celebrated. "What's the operational objective?" she asked, falling back into the tactical planning mindset that had defined her previous career. "Primary objective is to eliminate the network's leadership and disrupt their operations permanently," Chun replied, pulling up target profiles that showed Webb and his key associates. "Secondary objective is to recover intelligence that can be used to prosecute the remaining participants through official channels, assuming we can find prosecutors who aren't compromised themselves. Tertiary objective," Mitchell added quietly, "is to do this without creating a scandal that would damage public confidence in military institutions that are fundamentally sound despite the corruption of individual participants." Elena studied the target profiles with the analytical detachment that had made her effective in similar operations. Webb and his associates were experienced intelligence professionals who would be difficult to approach through conventional means, but they had made themselves vulnerable through their greed and the systematic nature of their betrayal. The financial transactions required regular meetings, communication protocols, and operational security measures that could be exploited by someone with Elena's capabilities. "I'll need equipment, intelligence support, and operational flexibility to conduct surveillance and direct action as circumstances require," she said, beginning to formulate a plan that would systematically dismantle the network while protecting the evidence needed for prosecutions. "Already arranged," Mitchell replied, gesturing toward a door that led to an equipment room stocked with military hardware that officially didn't exist. "Full support for whatever approach you think will be most effective." Elena spent the next hour reviewing intelligence files and operational plans while familiarizing herself with equipment that represented 12 years of advancement in military technology. The weapons were lighter and more accurate than what she had used during her active service. The communication systems were more secure and versatile, and the surveillance equipment was capable of gathering intelligence from distances that would have seemed impossible a decade ago. But technology was only part of the equation. The real advantage came from understanding how corrupt networks operated and where they were most vulnerable to the kind of targeted pressure that could force them to make mistakes. Webb and his associates had been successful because they operated in the shadows, using classification and compartmentalization to avoid detection. But Elena had spent years learning how to hunt in those same shadows, and she understood their weaknesses better than they understood their own operational security. The network's primary vulnerability is its dependence on regular communication between participants, she explained to Mitchell and Chun as she finished her equipment inspection. Webb has to coordinate with his foreign buyers, manage his domestic contacts, and eliminate threats to the operation. That requires meetings, phone calls, and financial transactions that can be intercepted and analyzed. "We've been monitoring their communications for months," Chun replied, "but they use sophisticated encryption and change their protocols regularly. Most of what we intercept is fragmentary and difficult to interpret without additional context." Elena smiled with the confidence of someone who had conducted similar operations against targets who thought they were untouchable. "They're not expecting to be hunted by someone who knows their operational methods and has access to their classified protocols. I can get close enough to gather the intelligence we need while positioning myself to eliminate key participants when the opportunity presents itself." The plan that emerged from their discussions was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential effectiveness. Elena would return to her cover identity as Maria Vasquez while conducting surveillance on Webb and his associates, using her access to government buildings and her invisibility as a cleaning woman to gather intelligence. That would expose the full scope of the network. When she had sufficient evidence to ensure successful prosecutions, she would systematically eliminate the leadership while ensuring that the intelligence reached prosecutors who could handle the remaining participants. "The timeline is critical," Mitchell emphasized as they finalized operational details. Webb is planning a major transaction next week that will compromise an entire Army Ranger unit scheduled for deployment to Syria. If we don't stop him before then, 12 more American soldiers are going to die in what will look like operational casualties, but will actually be targeted assassinations. Elena felt the familiar weight of operational responsibility settling on her shoulders. The knowledge that lives depended on her ability to execute a complex mission under conditions that left no margin for error. This was the environment where Elena Santos had earned her legendary status, conducting operations that seemed impossible to everyone, except the people who had trained for exactly these circumstances. I'll need 48 hours to establish surveillance and gather actionable intelligence, she said, checking her equipment one final time before preparing to return to recover identity. After that, we move to direct action phase and start eliminating targets. She left the safe house before dawn, returning to her apartment where Maria Vasquez would prepare for another night of emptying trash cans and mopping floors in government buildings where important people conducted business that officially didn't exist. But now she would be listening differently to conversations and looking more carefully at documents that might reveal the location and timing of meetings between people who were selling American lives for profit. The federal building felt different when she returned to work that evening, no longer a place where she hid from a past that had become too dangerous to acknowledge. Now it was an operational environment where Elena Santos could use her invisibility and access to gather intelligence against enemies who had no idea they were being hunted by someone they thought was dead. The transformation from hiding to hunting was complete, and the war for the soul of American Special Operations was about to begin in earnest. Webb's office was on the 4th floor, in a section of the building that required special clearance, and was supposedly secure from unauthorized access. But Maria Vasquez had been cleaning those offices for 3 years, and Elena Santos understood security systems better than the people who had designed them. Getting close enough to plant surveillance devices would require patience and careful timing, but it was well within her capabilities. The first device went into Webb's office telephone during her regular cleaning routine, a listening device so small and sophisticated that it would be virtually undetectable even during security sweeps. The second device was planted in the ventilation system above the conference room where Webb held his regular meetings with defense contractors, positioned to record conversations that participants thought were private and secure. Within 72 hours, Elena had gathered enough intelligence to understand the full scope of Webb's operations and identify the key participants in his network. The conversations she recorded revealed not just financial corruption, but detailed plans for targeting specific military units whose personnel had become liabilities to the operation. The scope of the betrayal was even worse than her initial assessment had suggested, involving not just the sale of classified information, but the systematic murder of American military personnel who posed threats to the network's continued profitability. The evidence she gathered would be sufficient to prosecute dozens of participants and expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. But prosecution would take years and might be sabotaged by the same corruption that had allowed the network to operate undetected for so long. Elena Santos had never been patient with legal processes when American lives were at immediate risk, and this situation called for more direct methods. Webb's next meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at a private club in Virginia where defense contractors regularly entertained Pentagon officials under circumstances that provided privacy for discussions that couldn't take place in official settings. Elena studied the location and security arrangements with the analytical precision that had made her successful in similar operations, identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited for surveillance or direct action as circumstances required. The club was exactly what she had expected, an exclusive establishment where powerful people conducted business that required discretion and privacy. Security was designed to keep out unwanted observers rather than to protect against the kind of targeted operation that Elena was planning. The guards were private contractors focused on maintaining appearances rather than detecting genuine threats, and their procedures were adequate for normal circumstances, but useless against someone with Elena's training and capabilities. She arrived early and established herself in a service area where Maria Vasquez would be invisible to the club's members and staff. The serving staff included temporary workers who came and went regularly, making it easy for her to blend in while positioning surveillance equipment that would record Webb's meeting with his foreign contacts. The equipment was sophisticated enough to capture conversations from across the room while transmitting the intelligence to secure servers where it could be analyzed in real time. Webb arrived exactly on schedule, accompanied by two men who carried themselves with the disciplined bearing of career military officers despite their civilian attire. Elena recognized one of them from intelligence files as Colonel James Morrison, a Pentagon procurement specialist who had been involved in several defense contracts that had failed to deliver promised capabilities while generating enormous profits for connected companies. The other man was unfamiliar, but carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to wielding significant authority. The foreign contacts arrived separately, three men who looked like business executives, but whose operational security measures identified them as intelligence professionals representing hostile interests. Elena activated her recording equipment as the group settled into a private dining room, where they could discuss business without concern for unwanted listeners. The conversation that followed was even more damaging than Elena had anticipated. Webb and his associates weren't just selling classified information. They were actively coordinating with foreign intelligence services to target American military operations in ways that would maximize casualties while minimizing suspicion. The Army Ranger unit scheduled for deployment to Syria was just the latest in a series of operations that had been compromised to serve the interests of America's enemies. The Rangers will be inserted here, Webb said, indicating a location on a map that Elena could see through her surveillance equipment. Intelligence suggests they'll encounter resistance from local militias, but they won't know that the militias have been provided with American weapons and tactical information that will allow them to coordinate an effective ambush. Elena felt sick as she listened to American military officers planning the murder of their own soldiers for money. The Rangers who would die in Syria would be heroes who had volunteered to serve their country in dangerous circumstances, and they would be killed by people who had sworn the same oaths and worn the same uniform. The betrayal was so complete and systematic that it challenged her fundamental understanding of military service and loyalty. But she had heard enough to take action. The intelligence she had gathered would be sufficient to prosecute everyone involved while exposing the full scope of their betrayal. More importantly, she now knew exactly where Webb and his key associates would be for the next 2 hours, isolated from security support and focused on business that required their complete attention. Elena left her surveillance position and began moving through the club with the silent efficiency that had made her legendary among special operations personnel. Her targets were professional intelligence officers who would be difficult to approach through conventional means, but they were also arrogant enough to believe that their security arrangements were adequate to protect them from any potential threat. Webb's bodyguard was the first to die, eliminated silently in a restroom where Elena had waited for him to separate from the group. The man was experienced and well-trained, but he wasn't expecting to be attacked by someone who had spent years perfecting the art of silent elimination. His death was quick and professional, leaving no evidence that would immediately alert the others to the danger they were facing. Morrison was next, approached while he was alone in the club's library reviewing documents related to the evening's business. Elena materialized behind him like a shadow-given substance, her combat knife, finding its target before he could make a sound. His death was as silent and efficient as his bodyguard's, part of a systematic elimination of traitors who had betrayed everything that military service was supposed to represent. The foreign intelligence officers were more challenging targets. Trained professionals who maintained operational awareness even in supposedly secure environments. But Elena had studied their security procedures during her surveillance, and she understood their vulnerabilities better than they understood their own operational security. They died one by one, eliminated with the clinical precision of someone who had conducted similar operations in hostile territory around the world. Webb himself was the final target, found alone in the private dining room where he had been planning the murder of American soldiers for profit. He looked up as Elena entered, his expression shifting from surprise to recognition as he realized who was standing before him. "Elena Santos," he said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of fear and grudging respect. "I heard you died in a training accident 12 years ago." "I did die," Elena replied, moving closer with the predatory grace that had made her feared by enemies who had never seen her coming. But legends have a way of coming back when good people need protection from traitors who sell American lives for profit. Webb reached for the weapon he carried in a shoulder holster, but Elena was already inside his defensive perimeter, with her knife positioned against his throat. Years of corruption and desk duty had made him soft, while Elena had spent 12 years preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation. "The Rangers in Syria," she said quietly, pressing the blade against his skin hard enough to draw blood. "You're going to call your contacts and cancel that operation. Then you're going to provide me with a complete list of everyone involved in your network, including the foreign buyers and the American participants." "You can't stop this," Webb gasped, though his voice carried the desperation of someone who realized that his carefully constructed world was collapsing around him. "The network is too big, too well connected. Even if you kill me, someone else will take over the operation." Elena smiled with the cold satisfaction of someone who had spent years planning for exactly this moment. "Marcus, you made the same mistake that every traitor makes eventually. You forgot that there are still people in this world who believe in something more important than money." She pressed the knife deeper, feeling Webb's pulse accelerate as he realized that his life was measured in seconds rather than years. "The difference between people like you and people like me is that I'm willing to die for what I believe in, while you're only willing to kill other people for what you want." "Wait," Webb gasped, his arrogance finally cracking under the reality of imminent death. "I can give you names, locations, financial accounts, everything you need to destroy the entire network. Just don't kill me." Elena considered his offer for exactly 3 seconds before making the decision that Elena Santos would have made without hesitation. People like Webb had been responsible for the deaths of dozens of American military personnel, and they would continue killing as long as they were allowed to live. Some betrayals were too complete and systematic to be forgiven or rehabilitated. "The information is already recorded and transmitted to people who will know how to use it," she said quietly. "Your value as a source of intelligence ended the moment I started recording your meetings. Now your only value is as an example of what happens to people who sell American lives for profit." Webb's death was quick and professional, conducted with the same clinical efficiency that had characterized Elena's entire operation. As his body went limp, she felt the satisfaction of justice finally served against someone who had betrayed everything that military service was supposed to represent. The network he had built would be systematically dismantled using the intelligence she had gathered, and the remaining participants would face prosecution by people who understood the true scope of their betrayal. Elena left the club as silently as she had entered, disappearing into the Virginia night while emergency responders discovered the aftermath of her operation. The deaths would be investigated by federal agents who would find evidence pointing toward foreign intelligence services eliminating their own assets to prevent exposure, a conclusion that would protect Elena's continued existence while ensuring that the surviving network participants faced maximum pressure from law enforcement. Admiral Mitchell was waiting at the safe house when Elena returned, her expression showing a mixture of relief and concern for what Elena's return to active operations might mean for her long-term survival. The intelligence that Elena had gathered during her infiltration of Webb's network was already being analyzed by specialists who understood the full implications of the betrayal that had been exposed. "How many people did we lose?" Mitchell asked as Elena submitted her after-action report. "Webb, Morrison, and 5 foreign intelligence officers," Elena replied. "Clean eliminations with evidence pointing toward internal disputes within the network rather than external intervention. The remaining participants will be too busy protecting themselves to continue their operations against American military personnel." Mitchell nodded with the grim satisfaction of someone who had spent 30 years making similar calculations about justice and operational necessity. "The intelligence you gathered will be sufficient to prosecute at least 30 participants. Through official channels, the network is effectively destroyed, and the threat to American military personnel has been eliminated." Elena felt the weight of successful mission completion settling on her shoulders, along with the knowledge that she had once again changed the course of history through actions that would never be officially acknowledged or celebrated. The Army Rangers scheduled for deployment to Syria would live because she had been willing to risk everything to protect them, just as the SEAL team she had extracted would survive, because Elena Santos refused to let good people die for other people's profit. "What happens now?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Now you disappear again," Mitchell replied. "Maria Vasquez returns to emptying trash cans and staying invisible, while Elena Santos becomes a legend that people whisper about in the darkest corners of military intelligence. The world needs people like you alive and operational, but it also needs you to remain dead officially." Elena understood the necessity of returning to her cover identity, but something had changed during the past week that made the prospect of hiding seem less appealing than it had before. She had remembered what it felt like to protect people who deserved protection, to use her skills for purposes that transcended personal survival and safety. Maria Vasquez had been a necessary fiction, but Elena Santos was who she truly was. And these operations had reminded her why that identity was worth preserving. "There will be other networks," she said, thinking about the broader implications of what they had discovered. "Other people selling American lives for profit. Other traitors who think they can hide behind classification and compartmentalization." Mitchell smiled with the understanding of someone who had spent her entire career fighting similar battles against corruption and betrayal. "And when those networks emerge, Elena Santos will be ready to hunt them down. Some legends never really die. They just wait in the shadows for the moment when needed most." As dawn broke over Seattle, Elena prepared to return to her apartment, where Maria Vasquez would resume her quiet life of night shifts and careful invisibility. But now she would be listening differently to conversations in government buildings, watching for signs of corruption that threatened American lives, ready to emerge from the shadows whenever good people needed protection from enemies, who wore the same uniform and carried the same clearances as their victims. The war for the soul of American special operations would continue, fought by people who understood that some principles were worth more than personal safety or official recognition. Elena Santos was back, and the next generation of traitors would learn what their predecessors had discovered too late. Legends exist to protect the innocent and punish the guilty, and some ghosts are very much alive. 6 months later, Maria Vasquez was cleaning the offices of the federal building when she heard a group of Navy SEALs discussing their upcoming deployment to a classified location where they would conduct operations that officially didn't exist. She listened carefully to their conversation, noting the confidence and professionalism that marked them as elite operators who had earned the thaimwa, right to serve their country in the most dangerous circumstances. As they passed her in the hallway, the senior SEAL paused and looked at her with an expression of curiosity mixed with recognition. For a moment, Elena thought her cover might be compromised, but then the man simply nodded respectfully and continued on his way. She realized that he had sensed something familiar about her bearing or manner, the indefinable quality that marked someone who had served in similar circumstances and understood the true cost of protecting American interests. Later that evening, as Maria finished her rounds and prepared to leave the building, she found a small envelope that had been left on her cleaning cart. Inside was a challenge coin from SEAL Team 7, along with a note written in the precise handwriting of someone who had been trained to communicate under difficult circumstances. To the guardian angel who watches over those who serve, the note read, "Your legend lives on in the hearts of people who understand the meaning of sacrifice and service. We know you're out there, and we're grateful for your protection." Elena smiled as she put the coin and note in her pocket, feeling the satisfaction of recognition from people who understood what she had sacrificed to protect them. Maria Vasquez would continue emptying trash cans and staying invisible, but Elena Santos would always be ready to emerge from the shadows when good people needed protection from enemies who threatened everything that military service was supposed to represent. The legend was alive and the watch continued. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.